Welcome to the second episode of Monthly, the interview platform of the Public Law Corner. My name is Twendi and I'm your host for today, and I am personally super excited to have our guest here with us. Her name is Karabo Ozah. And just a brief introduction for those who may not understand how lucky we are to have Karabo with us today. Karabo is an attorney and the director for the Center for Child Law based at the University of Pretoria. She's also a member of the advisory committee of the South African Law Reform Commission's project on care and contact with children. She is also a member of the Hague Expert Group on International Parentage and Surrogacy, and she has served as an independent board member and the national chairperson of Childline South Africa from 2009 until 2016. Did I leave anything out?
No, that will do for now. Thank you. That's fine.
Oh, she also teaches and lectures undergraduate and postgraduate courses at the University of Pretoria in the Faculty of Law. Perfect. All right. So Karabo, we always like to sort of start out with the icebreaker to get to know our guests on a more personal level. And I have two questions for you in that regard. The first is, what is your favorite book or a book you often recommend, and how has it influenced your perspective on your life or your career in public law?
So, I think the book I would like to share that influenced where I am now in my career is actually a book I read when I was doing matric. So when I was doing high school, I was planning to go to medical school, and then my mom was working for a law firm, and I went to kind of help there after the matric exams. And the lady who owned the law firm gave me John Grisham's Rainmaker. So I went home, I read the book, and that is the reason why I studied law. So for those who don't know about the book, I mean, we might have seen the movie because they made a movie out of the book. But the book is about a young lawyer who just finished university, trying to, get a job and running to all sorts of troubles and some real challenges that I think many young lawyers face when they start their careers. Also, the story that got me to actually decide to study law was the kind of David and Goliath versus Goliath kind of story where they were wanting to do the cases against the medical insurance company that did not pay claims. So one particular family of many, I mean, when their child got leukemia and they were trying to say, no, but that's not covered because you didn't disclose this and that. And I found, like, when he was, in the book, when you read the story, you can imagine in your head the hardships of trying to help people who have nothing, who use their last money to get medical insurance. Now that they need it, they can't use it. And I mean, that fight that he was trying to mount and the challenges and being against this big law firm somehow got to me. And that's really why I studied law. And it may sound like a bit cliche, but actually I ended up studying law with the idea that, maybe one can use the law to make a little bit of a change, to help those who need help, and protect them against like exploitation. Obviously, in practice and growing up now, you realize that there are limits to what you can do. But that is the book that even till today I think about it, and as somebody who started a career in trying to use the law to help people, still after all these years I don't have regrets, because I think it had a bigger purpose for my life, that kind of thinking. So, and also I didn't go into law then with misconceptions of making money and stuff, because again, if you read that book, you can even imagine they're trying to write board exams and they're failing, the guy who was working with, so, and then in working, I mean, eventually he stops working at a legal practice because he's not making money and decides to go and teach. But that story, it's funny. I think if young lawyers read it today, it will reflect so much of the reality even till today, because it doesn't beat about the bush about how it's all perfect. Yeah.
So many of us went to law school. I mean, not me personally, maybe me. Went to law school because of watching shows where, it was corporate lawyers. You're the good wife, you're Boston Legal, there's a generation of us who maybe went to law school for those reasons. So I'm always interested to hear how people end up in public interest, particularly when, what you see on TV, what you perhaps read in books is always geared towards a career in like corporate commercial law and going towards the big five. And you've actually segued into my next question, which is going to be sort of what developed your interest in public law. So clearly you've sort of always wanted to work in public interest law. And I'm interested to know sort of then what, once you did get to law school, what was your journey? Were you always, I know you started your career at the law clinic, at the UP Law Clinic. Did you always sort of want to work for a public interest law firm? Was that always the goal once you got to law school? And sort of how did you make your way to working for the UP Law Clinic, and what was the journey there?
Yeah, so I came then started studying, and you know that in final year here at UP, there's an elective that you choose that is practical law, where you actually start going to the law clinic to assist real life clients. So I took that, and me and a few of my friends were in the law firm where we consulted with clients and started helping them. And that actually was when I really now were clear in my head that I don't want to. I had never even thought about the big law firms. A lot of my friends were talking about it. It was their thing. I was thinking legal aid. Then, we do the law clinic. Then I'm like, okay, this actually is something that I could do. So the law clinic became the only place where I applied for articles.
Oh,
So I
okay.
applied for articles, then did the interview, and then I got the job. But then I had, as life is, then you have challenges. So in my final year, I always want to reflect reality of many young students, and hopefully they don't give up on themselves. So in my final year, then I failed a second semester module of criminal law. And I didn't even get a special exam. So now I had to walk from the law building. Those who are familiar with UP, you walk from the one side to the other side to the law clinic to go and explain to my my future principal that I have failed this module. Does that mean I lose my articles or what? And then he said to me, okay, you know what? Let me think about it. I'll come back to you. Now I'm really nervous because I have nothing else but the law clinic. But I was fortunate enough for them to accommodate me, meaning that in the first year of my articles, I couldn't appear in court because you don't get right of appearance if you have modules that you're still doing. But I learned a lot and did a lot of work still there. And because, when you know that you have a bit of a deficit somewhere, you try and make up for it in other ways. So I put my best foot in relation to all the other work that I could do at the law clinic. And I eventually then passed the criminal law and graduated. Yeah.
No, I studied the EP, so I know what criminal law was. It was you did a miracle and a prayer.
Yes.
I mean, but I'm glad to hear you didn't give up. And I think it's important for people. I think it's easy to go to university as an overachiever and assume that, you're going to have the same trajectory that you had in high school, and you have that sort of first failure or second failure, and you feel like you can't, especially when you have it right at the end, right? It's like, oh, I've done everything right up until this point, and then now. But also kudos to the principal that you had who was willing to let you, in practice in other ways, even if you weren't technically allowed to appear or do anything like that. So I'm glad to hear that. And that again segues into, you're the perfect guest, segues into my next question, which is sort of clearly mentorship, just by virtue of that conversation, has played quite a part in your career. And I recently had a conversation with a family member of mine who said she's never had a mentor before. And I said to her, you probably have had one, even if you haven't had a formal mentor-mentee relationship, because a mentor can be someone who just sort of guides you in your career. And I know I have had several people like that as I've gone along in my career. And I'm curious to know sort of what part mentorship has played in your story as a junior lawyer, but also now that you are sort of in a leadership position, how you try to work mentorship into your sort of, you can say, your KPIs, how you sort of do your job.
Yeah. No, very, very important. So as you rightly say, so I went to the law clinic, did my articles, and my principal, he was a great mentor, but he was funny. He was one of those kind of distance one, give you a space to do anything and everything. Sometimes you go to him with a problem, he won't really give you the answer. He, kind of pushes you to problem solve yourself. And that was a great learning space. You had to kind of teach yourself quite a lot, but you knew that he was there to back you up. And I never felt like I was failing at anything. So then I did my articles, got admitted, and then one of my friends now, but a former colleague here at the Center for Child Law, was doing her articles and at the law clinic as well. She was seconded, and one day she just said to me, "Oh, there's a Center for Child Law is looking for an attorney, and I think will be perfect." And I'm like, "Center for what?" And then she's like, "Center for Child Law." And then she explained to me. I went on the website, then I applied, and I got to the center, and that's where I got the most brilliant mentors in Professor Anne Skelton and my friend Karina Dutoy. She's now at the bar, but for 10 years we were working together here at the Center for Child Law. Where again you're given space to grow, but people are leading you by doing. Because I had to now had a steep learning of child law. Quickest way to learn, Professor Skelton said, you know what, do your masters in child law because you'll be learning as you're working. Best thing ever. So I did my masters in child law, started practicing, appearing in court myself, got my right of appearance. And so the biggest mentors were at that time Professor Skelton, who continues to be my mentor to today. And that's very important, Tondi, because as you rise, people sometimes think that you yourself don't need a mentor. So, she was my director for a long time, then left the center, but she remains my mentor in a sense that, but it's funny enough, we have a dual mentorship. Sometimes she calls me to say, oh, these people want to do this. And do you think I should do this? And that was, for me, here at the center was the space where I grew the most, because I had people who were genuinely seeing even potential in me that I was not seeing. Creating spaces locally and internationally, creating spaces for me to learn and to have that CV that you read out. And as I say, till today, we remain, having that dual mentorship. When I took over from Professor Skelton here at the center, she was confident that I'm ready to do what needs to be done. But I also knew that if I had a stumbling block here and there, I know where to find that kind of. So as you said in the, when you were posing the idea about mentorship, there are different ways that mentorships take place. And the most important thing, I think, it's for the individual to know or be clear about whether they will use their space to learn. Like, you can have people mentoring you in a different way, not sitting down and say, okay, now you must report to me if you're struggling, because we're all different. And the trick is to use the space. If somebody is a lead by doing kind of, by example kind of a person, follow that. I was never sat down to say, oh, you're not doing this, now you must appear. It was just like, okay, we do this. Are you ready? We can do this. You ready? And from that, this is what I'm now implementing myself. Obviously, knowing very well that personalities are different. Sometimes now when you're a manager, some people need more kind of sitting down with and saying, okay, where do you need help? Other people are just flourishing. They do the same thing. So you're like, okay, here's the space. Yeah. This is the case. How are we gonna do this? Are you happy with this? Okay, let's run with it. And very key thing also about mentorship is doing away with hierarchy. So if you come to our office, you will not know who's the boss, who's the what. I'm nobody's boss. I'm being, given the Center for Child Law to run it best, to promote children's rights, protect children's rights, work with my colleagues to advance the center's work. And that is what I was taught. So if tomorrow I step out of the center and say, look, I'm going somewhere, the center must still be able to continue. And that is also part of being a great leader and a great mentor. Can't hog the space, and it's about Karabo, the individual. I never subscribe to that. And everybody here at the center, I sometimes even joke with them. I'm like, guys, if tomorrow I say to you, I'm going to The Hague, bye-bye. The center will shut down. What will happen? So it's not my mother's house. So that for me is very important. And as leaders, we must do that. We must, we must create space for all of us to lead. Because that is what I was done from. People would used to call and say, because, I don't even done my doctorate, but I will start soon. I don't have a title. I'm just Karabo. And they will call, oh, Mrs. Skelton. And she'll be like, no, you can't talk to me about that. Karabo is the expert on that. Go speak to Karabo. And I do the same. It doesn't begin and ends with me. And there's strength in that, because it means all of us can do the work. And also you have candidate attorneys and attorneys who are confident in doing the work, and we can reach more people in that way. So that is like, that's how you create mentorship. Well, even my young staff members, our young staff members here at the center, they mentor me. I mean, they always come up with some other ideas on how we should do our media, how we should do our communication,
Yeah.
how, it's a dual process because we've created space, we're sharing, we're learning from each other. That is very important.
Yeah.
This thing of wanting power to sit with you as an individual, I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah, we usually, as the public law corner, we always consider ourselves a space for young students to sort of listen to these recordings, for example, and gain inspiration and figure out how to navigate the space. But I think what you've just done now is also, I'm hoping that there are people in leadership positions or people who are trying to get into leadership positions who can listen to what you're saying about what it means to be a leader, what it means to mentor, what it means to pass over the torch, what it means to make sure that an organization that does not rely on one individual person, but rather is, a place that can thrive, whether that person is there or whether that person is not there. And you're dropping many gems. And I think it's the same principle as on dual mentorship. It's the same principle as therapists need therapists. Mentors also have their mentors. Yeah. It's sort of like it's circular in a way that it's people helping people, and that's essentially what it is. You've already dropped a few gems, but I am curious to know if you have any advice for up and coming lawyers who are trying to get into the public interest space, whether maybe they, for whatever reason, had to go into corporate and are trying to pivot back into public interest, or are students and they want to work in the public interest space. Do you have any sort of advice on how they can, start that journey?
So, the first thing I will say, they must know that this is not a very glamorous job. It's nice when we have our very nice, beautiful cases in the constitutional courts and all that. But the first thing that must drive you for this work is passion. You must really want to work with people to make a difference, whether it's a Center for Child Law or other organizations that we work with, like today, Lawyers for Human Rights and Children's Institute, and ourselves at court on blocked IDs. You must be led by passion, because this work is very demanding. And when you work with people who are already the most marginalized, you have to have the heart to want to help people.
Yeah.
You have to have that patience. There are a lot of direct cases apart from the beautiful constitutional court cases that will test you. People in difficult circumstances sometimes are difficult.
Yeah.
So you have to have that. That's a start. You have to have a passion. And then you have to then kind of work towards getting the skills that you need. So I would say, if you are at a university where you can work at law clinics in your final year, do that. That bodes well for you. If you can do a master's in an area like human rights or child law, then do that. And then you can then apply. So you mentioned the fact that sometimes people have to go to corporate and might take time to come back, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there are skills that you also learn wherever you are that you will bring. And we've seen some people who actually went to private law firms and then came to our center, that they bring some skills, so it's never wasted. And obviously then once you've started reading yourself and understanding the laws and the policies a little bit, because you are going to be asked about that when you get interviewed, then you must then apply to the relevant places. But I really think that people must really want to do the real work. As I said, we had a few cases where you hire somebody and you're like, okay, we need to go to Pretoria Central or wherever where our clients are, and they're like, oh, I don't go there. And then you're like, okay, but that our clients are who are children who have this problem, and we will go there. So that is the thing that people need to understand. Apart from again, I will repeat this, apart from the cases that end up in the conflict, there are times where we've driven 6 hours to go find a child who's been abused, who doesn't have this, who doesn't have that. We drive for 6 hours into the middle of Paul Petersburg and all that. That requires heart. That requires you to really care about the work. And then obviously you must be willing to read a lot as lawyers. There's a bit of a challenge. Some lawyers don't like reading these days. And we need to do something about that, because the job of a lawyer is to read, write, and argue your have to have a combination of some emotional intelligence, and then also the hard skills, the hard legal skills, because our work is not soft work. And there's sometimes this misconception. It's not soft work. And because the work that we do most of the time is challenging government policies, challenging government actions, and the response can be quite sometimes, it can take you aback,
Yeah.
and you must be willing to stand your ground. Like, as I tell you, today we have the case about blocked IDs in the court, and people are saying, oh, you are protecting foreigners. Sad part is that if you come and read our papers, 80% to 90% of the people are South Africans from rural Eastern Cape who always had problems, duplicate IDs, that then IDs were blocked. The 10% you'll find that one parent is a South African, the other is a non-South African. The child is still entitled to citizenship. So when those kind of backlash, which is kind of increasing actually against our organizations like ours, we have to be able to stand our ground and read the room. You must know when you can just avoid it. Like Twitter, sometimes I just ignore some of the things there. I'm like, the work will speak for itself. But we need to know that it's not all glamorous. And even in the courts, you get a hard time about the remedies that you propose. Courts are worried that they're overstepping into the space of the executive. So it is hard work. It is very hard work that requires you to forever be learning, always be open to learning, and keeping your eye on the ball. But one of the things that in recent years also is making it more rewarding even is the solidarity amongst our organizations, because like today there's 3-4 of us for organizations doing one case, and that helps us to really strategize, to really strengthen our voice, to really also think through about what will be the best solution in relation to remedy. As lawyers, we know the most important thing when you go to court is the remedy. Are you going to solve the situation that you say is problematic? So yeah, so it does require quite a lot. We also, you were talking about therapists. Fortunately, I haven't needed a therapist up to now, but we actually debrief a lot in our passage. People come, because we're in the law building with academics, and we are also dabbling in as academics. But if you come here and we're angry, and there's something that's making us angry, there's a case that you'll find us like gathered outside, like, and by the time we go home, we've made a plan as to how we're going to resolve this. We feel a bit better about it, so that we don't all end up being depressed, because the work can sometimes do get to you that, look, we're trying to find solutions, and now people are making it as if it's about us. Not about us, it's about the fact that we said children have these constitutional rights, and now you're violating them. Surely there must be accountability, no?
Yeah, it is. It's not Suits. It's not The Good Wife. It's not glamorous. You're not sitting in a tall building in the middle of Sandton. You are, in the trenches a lot of the time. You don't have the capacity that people at big firms, have. You're often doing the work of, you're wearing several hats. You're not just an attorney. You're also, in some ways, a therapist. You're an advisor. You are, and it can be emotionally taxing work. So, that is all very relevant things to remind people of when going into the space, because I do think from the outside, it looks like, people in public interest are just hanging out at the Constitutional Court and setting cool precedents. People often forget the journey that it takes to get to that point.
And the journey after, because also you must make sure that those wins translate to changing something.
Exactly. It's not like you get the judgment and then the job is done. There is plenty of work still to be done after that. And again, it's like you're in my mind because you've again segued into the next question. I did want to chat to you about the blocked IDs case, because from what I've seen on social media, it has sort of, in some ways, taken, it's turned into perhaps this potentially xenophobic situation. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to explain a little bit more about what the blocked IDs case is about, what it's trying to achieve, and just give us a little bit of insight into the case.
I think that the easiest way to explain it is that Home Affairs has powers to literally block your ID. So I could wake up tomorrow with my ID blocked, meaning that I can't use the bank, I can't do anything related, all the stuff that you do because you exist legally in a system, you can't do. And that is done without a due process. So the most critical thing about this case is that firstly, we say you're blocking IDs without due process. And then the process to try and unblock it, also, there is no proper process. People wait for 10 years while they say they're investigating. So they will say to you, well, there's a duplicate ID on your ID. Then you're like, okay, but this is me. Here's my mom doing an affidavit confirming that this is me. This is my birth certificate and everything. And still there won't be timelines for how your ID is going to be unblocked and how long will it take. And while that done, then you can't register your children if you give birth. So
Yeah.
now you have another generation of people whose identity is at risk. So imagine if you take 10 years to resolve that. In that 10 years, somebody is giving birth to children that are not registered. They don't exist legally in the system. And with our Birth and Death Registration Act, the longer you take to register a birth, the more strenuous the requirement. So by the time you get unblocked, if you're lucky to, the hurdles now to register your children is a mission. So from our side as a center, obviously we support the case of the other applicants representing the parents, but also making the point that because the parents are blocked, their children now do not exist legally. And just in relation to children, 2 years ago, we had to do a case 3 years ago about children without birth certificates being able to access education. We had to do things about children without birth certificates being able to access grants. So you can see how already once the children don't have a birth certificate because their parents' ID are blocked, there are a lot of serious repercussions for that family, for those children. And surely that cannot be without due process. So basically, really, the case is about that. Even the remedy that we're seeking, there is a consideration of whether the IDs should be immediately unblocked, which I don't think the court would go with. I was discussing with my colleague Lisa, who's in court today, that look, I think the court might feel that that's going too far, but maybe that there must be a process. There must be a proper audit of how many people in the country's IDs are blocked. Where is the process in relation to allowing them to make a case for unblocking? And that Home Affairs must come up with a plan as to how they're going to process and review each and everyone's ID that's been blocked, within a certain time frame. So for instance, 6 months to a year, there must be. And then also hopefully get the court to say that they will supervise the process. So get Home Affairs to maybe every 6 months, every 3 months to come and report and say this is the progress that we're making. So that unblocks the system and at least gives something for the families. And for the children, more importantly, we're saying that even though there's blockages on the IDs of the parents, the children should be registered. And once the cases in relation to the parents are resolved, there can be then a reconsideration either way. So yeah, so I think people are blowing it out of proportion. And as I say, the most important thing that people miss, just like when we did the case about access to education for undocumented learners, majority, 90% of those people are South Africans. There's families in the Eastern Cape, in KwaZulu-Natal, deep Eastern Cape, deep KwaZulu-Natal, where they are the people who are directly affected by this because of the duplicates in particular. There's quite a lot of issues with duplicates. And people are punished for things they know nothing about. Some of them found out when they were trying to register their babies that, well, there's a duplicate and we're blocking you, So we're trying to focus on what matters. I think currently the country is a bit on the edge in relation to these issues. So one is mindful of the tone, and also just sometimes not getting pulled into those and focusing on the case. Know what we're trying to do with the clients. And it's also part of being a strategic litigator. You have to know when to talk, when not to talk, how to package your case. And when to deal with these things. And we have newspaper articles actually that detail the stories of who are our clients, and they tell you it's these people from families from KwaZulu-Natal, from not people who do not qualify for citizenship. Obviously, when Home Affairs does their tally, you may find that in those 700,000 blocked IDs, they do have people who obtain citizenship fraudulently, but they must deal with those people appropriately. And not just now, use the same brush to say everybody is a fraud. That is, cannot allow that in a democratic state. And considering what the rights to name and nationality and to have your citizenship, what those things mean for people, it's not a right that you just easily just deprive somebody of. It's very crucial.
Yeah, I think there is this idea that's going around that civil society organizations are, defenders of fraud. And you mentioned earlier that you're really enjoying the space at the moment because civil society organizations are working together. You're working with Lawyers for Human Rights on this case and different civil society organizations. And I find that conversation interesting because last year I met with someone who had formerly worked for, I want to say the Department of Social Development, but I'm not 100% sure. He basically had worked in government. And when I mentioned to him that I previously worked in public interest, he said, when he was in public interest, this was very early after the Constitution was enacted. He said, At the time, they were working with civil society organizations to develop the constitution. There wasn't this divide between the state or the government and civil society organizations. They were trying to work together to come up with solutions that worked for everyone. And even in several instances where they were litigating technically against each other, it was sort of everyone knew that we were there to develop the constitution and that we needed certain precedent. It wasn't necessarily because, this department or that department was against the remedy or the solution that was being presented. And we've seen it obviously with all the fires, and particularly in the housing space, this idea that, it is the civil society organizations that are the cause of the havoc, which is clearly indicating that what he knows of the relationship between the state and civil society organizations may not necessarily be the relationship that is the current existing relationship. And I was curious to know whether your experience in, child law is similar. Is there do you feel like there is a divide and that divide is growing? Or do you feel as if there are instances where there's collaboration, or what does that relationship look like from the child law perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, that person is right. I mean, when I started here at the center, we used to litigate against certain departments, and still they will ask us to help them draft policies and stuff. And there was really, but I think currently it's a very strange space. And I think the biggest issue is we trying to push harder for accountability and enforcement of people's rights. And people are trying to hide their failures through other things, like if I can put it that. And I've seen it. I mean, we have cases where we got court orders in 2016, and you're trying to hold people accountable, and they're blaming all sorts of things. And you end up saying to them, look, we're going to put this in front of a judge, and you must come to explain to the judge, why is it that you're not? Then we are seen as being bad people. And what they forget, Tondi, and that's equally so for all organizations, is that if government was doing what they need to do for everybody in this country, I would go do another job. Tomorrow, I'll go find something else to do. Or I'll just teach. Law. But you keep focusing on, oh, they're making us do this, they're causing these problems. But if you just did what you are required to do, then you work us out of work. Then we don't have to be there. Then you don't have to worry about us. We are there because now there's a space. And if anything, right now, we're already starting to see even the gains we had made even in the children's rights space. They're regressing.
Yeah.
So now, not even trying to push for, well, we're trying to just say, let's at least not regress so much on so many things. You know the stories about education, quality, buildings. We still have pit toilets. How is it that if we're holding you accountable on those things, then it's made as if we are the bad people? So that is the biggest issue that I think in the country right now gives all of us sleepless nights, is that when we're trying to do the work that if you as government were performing, we wouldn't need to be doing, then we are then labeled with all sorts of names and painted in all sorts of brushes. And it does actually demoralize one.
Yeah.
Like there are times where you ask yourself, I ask myself questions about when we're building a case, I'm like, what are we even promising the children? Like in reality, what are we going to really be able to say we've done for them? That is the thing that worries me a lot these days. Is like, okay, we go to court, we get the court order. Will they really comply with it? Because otherwise we haven't done anything for the children. And that tells you the space we're in. It's not like before where they will come and say, look, we're struggling here, but this is what we've done. Let's go get a bit more time. Now there's also a bit of, couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
Couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
It is tough.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But yeah, that's really unfortunate. I am curious to know sort of, I'm very wary of being all doom and gloom. And I think if you go on social media these days, it's all very doom and gloom. And I want to take the opportunity to also focus on some of the good that is happening in the space and some of the achievements of the center. And I saw recently that you celebrated the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child's General Comment number 26. And I just wanted to know if you could share with us, some more information on that general comment, but any other sort of successes or sort of the beautiful side of the work that I know there isn't a lot of it at the moment, but some of the achievements and some of the wins that you've had recently in the past few years, if you could share some of that with us.
No, I mean, for as long as one is in the space and one is alive, we cannot give up. We cannot give up trying to do. I once met somebody who had been doing work for 40 years in the US on trying to change things, and the person said, well, we can't give up. So I try always to think about that person, that look, we can't give up. We have to keep pushing. So maybe, yeah, I'll go back to other things. But yes, on Monday, the general comment was launched on focusing on environmental rights, children's environmental rights, but with a closer lens on climate change. And it's a very important soft treaty, let me put it that way, because that the general comments are there to guide interpretation. But what is very critical in relation to this general comment is the fact that we are in the time where this issue is becoming a big problem, the issue of climate change, and how the environment is at risk, and that puts us at risk. I mean, we even saw Monday the big waves in KZN and in Cape Town, and you're like, oh, we're going to have tsunamis now. The nice thing about this, I think, is that it's the first general comment where there was really great effort to consult children across the world. So we also did that when there were calls for submissions. We collaborated with Makua, which is a mining affected community organization, and we actually had sessions in Limpopo and in Gauteng with children, and assisted them to make sure they make submissions in relation to what should the committee say or do in the general comment. And also, I was on the advisory committee for the drafting general comment, and we pushed for the general comment to really help with interpreting the right to a healthy environment, the rights, and also to show how the rights are interdependent and interrelated. Because one of the things that that happened recently, or like 2 years ago, was the judgment in a case by the Center for Environmental Rights, where in the judgment the judge says, oh, you are using best interest to try and leverage on the right to environment. It has nothing to do with it. So now we have the treaty that's giving us a basis to show how the rights are interdependent and interlinked. And currently, there are quite a number of cases pending in our courts in relation to the issue of climate justice and environmental rights. So this, for us, is very crucial that now we have this tool on which we can rely on. So it is positive. We have to try and keep forging ahead and trying to make sure that we hold the powers that be accountable, government and businesses, locally. I mean, that businesses are very much at the heart of climate issues. And it's always a bit of a David versus Goliath fight. So there's going to be quite a lot happening, not only in South Africa, across the world. We know there are a lot of cases. So that's one recent kind of positives. But I mean, I think over the years, I mean, the center's been in existence for 25 years. There are a lot of nice, beautiful judgments. I mean, the things that are really crucial is I told you earlier about the right to have education even though you're undocumented. I mean, that was a very crucial case that even till today, every year, we have to help children to get into schools, even though there's a judgment. So we are following up on that. We did a case about children of unmarried fathers and their right to be registered by the fathers where the moms are not there. Very, very important. Currently, we have a lot of fathers who raising children on their own and the moms are not there. And the law used to say, well, as a father, you can't register a child, whereas the parents are unmarried. So also very important win, because again, those cases, cover so many aspects of children's lives. We have, I mean, I can think of that now. This year, we got 2 judgments out of the Constitutional Court, not really kind of public law, but more private law. But again, very important, because one of the, historically in law, one of the issues that when it comes to children that's always been problematic was this differential treatment of children of married parents versus unmarried parents. And the 2 judgments that came out in June, we argued the cases in November and December last year. Both have to do with how, we treat children born to people who are not married. In the one case was about whether if there's a parental rights and responsibility dispute between the parents, they can go to the family advocate without needing a court order. And we won. We made the case that why must they get a court order first? Because the children are equally entitled to the protection of the Office of the Family Advocate. And the other case was about where you have same-sex couple who have now had a child and they're not married, whether they should automatically both be regarded as the parents of the child. Again, there was a win for us. So you see, those are like, I could say actually in the past 3-4 years, we've done quite a lot of work around this issue of the unequal treatment of children born to unmarried parents. And I think that's where we've made quite a dent, because it's unrealistic. The statistics show how many
Very
people
unrealistic.
get married are not getting married. So why do we have all these differential treatment, punishing children because they're born to parents who are unmarried? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. And then I may be taking us a bit back to doom here, but I also noticed that you guys litigated quite a bit during COVID. And I think one of the most important things that we also want to draw out of these interviews is sort of lessons learned and lessons for the future. And I'm curious to know what it was like to be doing this work during a pandemic, and how you think, if, touch wood, we ever ended up in another pandemic, how you think we could improve the system so that, the limitation on people's rights is perhaps not as cumbersome as it was for COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough time. I think one of the interesting things is that that's also the time where, as organizations, we came to be working quite closely and in solidarity, because we know during that time we did the case about access to full nutrition. It was led by Section 27 and Equal Education and Equal Education Law Center. And we went in as amicus. All that done online, case argued online, in judgment and everything during that time. It was tough because also you can't access clients easily. You can't meet in a room. So practically that was something that is very limiting. But what we have been thinking about, and I think not only our organization, I think even big UN organizations and all that are thinking about strategies for responding when there is a pandemic. Yeah. How would you be able to respond? Which system you could kind of tap into in relation to protecting children's rights? It's very difficult. So to give you an example, we're still reflecting about how children who are sentenced, who've committed offenses, unfortunately, and are sentenced to secure care centers, they had serious challenges during COVID, because they would go and appear in court and come back and have to isolate. By the time they finish isolating, they need to go back to court, and then their rights were violated. And we couldn't have access to them because of how government then put the regulations. So I think one of the stifling thing in relation to that is that you will not know what kind of regulations government will put and how will that affect us doing our work. But we also now collaborating with, for instance, the Human Rights Commission as a national preventative mechanism that has powers to visit those centers. And even during COVID, they were able to, because they are mandated to check if children are fine in those. So COVID, as difficult as it is, it actually brought out some ways that we could collaborate to ensure that children are protected in so many areas of the work. But I do think we still need to sit down and think about a strategy of, in the areas that we work, what would be the crucial things that will have to happen for children if that was the case. I mean, so school nutrition obviously focus on making sure that even children who are not in school were getting meals, but there was a big issue about homework and how some children at some places could collect. Remember the issue of online, being taught online. It was a big issue. I mean, it's not practical. It's not for everybody, data and devices. So what is showed was the inequalities actually will always make it difficult to help those who need help the most. Yeah, it was quite a tough moment. It was. And also, I mean, something that I should say is that organizations like ours are obviously funded by the donors, and you would have seen that people are saying we're getting monies from evil people. But nonetheless, one of the things that came up after COVID is that those donors changed focus, right? They had to give some money to respond to COVID. And that meant that it affected our funding and all those things. So it was quite a tricky time. Yeah.
And I think the big thing during COVID that was reflected was the digital divide, right? And I think the big solution at the time was, we'll just, shift to a digital environment. But that completely ignores how people don't even have network in certain areas. People don't have access to, certain tools. With load shedding now, it also means that you don't always have power. All of that affects network towers, and just sort of the big socioeconomic divide in South Africa was strongly exposed.
Yeah, and we left so many people behind. People behind. We can't. I mean, if we do an assessment, we probably see that. And I mean, also the one thing that for children is still something that we now continue to work on, was that it also exposed how children are vulnerable to abuse in their own homes, because we had these high-risk children who are now pregnant, but they were at home the whole time. So it's and those are things that we're still trying to recover from, work on, try and find answers, and put pressure on the powers that be to do something. But it's actually was a dark time,
and continues to be, seeing as the effects of that time are.
Yes, no, most definitely.
Okay, and then my last one. You did mention that we've said the word therapy. You know, you're doing very, very difficult work, and you're also not swimming in buckets of money. So I wanted to know what your advice was for people working in the space already, and people who want to work in the space, on how to take care of their mental health, how to take care of their own emotional well-being. And I think there's a lot of conversation at the moment about care for activists. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are on that, perhaps how you deal with it personally, or any other advice that you have on how to maintain, because if the mental health of those who are doing the work is shot to hell, that would pose quite a bit of a problem. And I wanted to know just sort of what your advice is on that front.
Yeah, I mean, because we're all different, we have different coping mechanisms and vices. So, I mean, some of us run to clear our minds and do gym and other things. But as I said, I think I've seen that some people do need to talk to people. Like even in the current cohort of colleagues I have, some people do go and speak to people, and that helps them. And there are some people that have actually asked them to do that, and they went, and it benefited them. So whatever you think you need to do to get better, you must do that. And I think those who are entrusted to lead organizations must create that space. So there has actually been, last year, there was a process where, as leaders or directors of social justice organizations, we reflected in a space about mental health in our organizations, and really being open to people to express how they feel, what would they want, how would they want to be assisted. So people must do that, and they must not take it, for granted. If you need help, you must shout out. I think I'm just, one day I'll write a book, but I think I've been through so many challenges that I just I just wake up. Let's see, what does today bring? But I know that it's not everybody's like that. Actually, every year when I start the year, I remind my colleagues that, look, you guys, me, this is how I roll with the punches. But if you need help, get help. So we're all different. And what I would say is that the leaders, though, must be mindful of their biases in relation to how some of us are just workhorses because we don't have a choice, and we are used to that. You have to do proposals, reports, still litigate and teach. So we kind of just roll with the punches, but create space for people, especially the young people, to be able to feel supported and to get the support that they need, without also penalizing it for it. I think the other thing is that, we always say this, that people must talk and all that, but just now you talk and then that is used against you, KPIs or whatever. We should find ways to accommodate people. Obviously, where people really have serious problems, they must get help. But I think one of the things that I sometimes worry about when I see how people are saying, you must talk, I know that even sometimes talking to people who are even older than me is that, well, once somebody exposes and explains that, then that changes how people view you, instead of really helping to get help. And we have quite a bit of a long way to go with that.
Okay. So we heard it here first. Your book is coming soon.
No, when I retire. I'll have more to say then.
Well, I look forward to it, and I hope you do write the book. I think it's important for us to understand the experiences of people who've worked in the space. And maybe one day, a few years from now, someone else will be interviewed and they'll say, what's the book that has impacted you? And it will be your book. So I'm going to hold you to that one. I'm going to hold you to that one. Well,
pressure. I see it. Yeah.
I think we can end on that note. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat to us. And for anyone who is listening to this interview or watching this interview, you can follow the work of the Center for Child Law on Twitter and on Facebook.
Yes, in LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn. And if you're not on social media, you can also go onto their website, which is pretty up to date and has all of their ongoing cases and the ongoing work. Thank you so much again for agreeing to chat to us. I'm so glad to have met you. And thank you to all of our listeners who have taken the time to listen to our show today. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Take care.